Okay, so you want to own a semiconductor factory. A building the size of dozens of football fields, robots gliding silently through corridors of humming machinery, chips smaller than a fingernail rolling off the line by the millions, each one worth more per gram than gold. Every phone, every car, every data center on the planet needs what you're making. That's the picture. That's the fantasy of owning the single most important choke point in the entire global economy, the place where sand becomes silicon becomes the brain of modern civilization. Here's what that fantasy leaves out. The factory you're picturing costs more to build than most professional sports stadiums combined, takes years to become operational even under ideal conditions, and can be rendered instantly obsolete by a single generation of technology it failed to keep pace with. You're not just competing on price or quality. You're competing in a race where falling even one step behind the frontier can turn a $20 billion facility into an expensive museum piece for chips nobody wants anymore. Understanding why this industry behaves nothing like a normal manufacturing business is the whole game. Before we talk about money, we need to be honest about the fact that owning a semiconductor factory isn't one business. It's at least 3 different businesses stacked inside the same building. The first is the foundry model, where you manufacture chips designed by other companies, essentially renting out your factory's capability to whoever can pay for it and meet your technical specifications. The second is the integrated device manufacturer model, where you design and manufacture your own chips end-to-end, capturing more value but carrying all the design risk yourself. The third, increasingly relevant model, is the specialty and legacy chip business, where you deliberately avoid the cutting edge entirely and manufacture older generation chips that never go out of demand because cars, appliances, and industrial equipment don't need the newest transistor, they need a reliable one made cheaply and consistently for decades. These are not interchangeable strategies. A foundry chasing the cutting edge and a legacy chip manufacturer are playing entirely different financial games on the same basic piece of equipment. Let's start with the number that breaks the fantasy immediately, the cost of actually building the thing. A modern leading-edge semiconductor fabrication plant, the kind capable of producing the chips found in the latest smartphones and AI accelerators, costs somewhere between $15 and $20 billion to build today, and that estimate assumes construction goes according to plan. It rarely does. TSMC's fab construction in Arizona, one of the most closely watched projects in the industry, faced repeated delays tied to labor shortages, specialized construction requirements, and the sheer difficulty of replicating Taiwan's manufacturing ecosystem on unfamiliar ground, pushing both the timeline and the budget well past original estimates. Intel's fab expansions in Ohio have followed a similar pattern, with completion dates sliding by years as the company recalibrated spending against its own financial pressures. This is the first lesson of the semiconductor industry. The announced groundbreaking date and the announced production date are both aspirational, not contractual. And the equipment inside that building is, if anything, an even bigger financial shock than the building itself. A single extreme ultraviolet lithography machine, the specialized equipment required to etch the finest circuit patterns onto silicon wafers, costs somewhere in the range of $150 to $200 million per unit, and a leading-edge fab needs multiple units just to run at meaningful volume. There is currently only one company on the planet, ASML in the Netherlands, capable of manufacturing these machines at the resolution required for cutting-edge chips, which means you're not just paying an enormous price. You're getting in line behind every other major chipmaker in the world competing for a production slot on a machine with a backlog measured in years. Owning the money isn't enough. You need the relationship and the patience to actually receive the equipment. Before a single wafer moves through that machine, there's a location problem most people never think about: water and power. A leading-edge fab can consume several million gallons of ultrapure water a day for cleaning silicon wafers between processing steps, water that has to be purified to a standard far beyond typical municipal drinking water, then treated again before it can be discharged. In water-stressed regions, this has become a serious point of local political tension, with Taiwanese fabs facing drought-related water rationing concerns and Arizona fabs drawing scrutiny over consumption in an already arid state. Power demands are just as severe. A single large fab can require the electricity output of a small city, running clean rooms, climate control, and machinery that cannot tolerate even momentary power fluctuations without risking the loss of an entire batch of wafers mid-process. Some fabs now negotiate directly with utilities or invest in dedicated power infrastructure just to guarantee the uninterrupted supply their process requires. Here's the trap that catches even well-capitalized companies. They budget for the building and the equipment and think that's the investment. It isn't. You need a workforce with an extremely specific and globally scarce skill set, engineers and technicians trained in processes that take years to master, and the industry is chronically short of exactly these people. When Intel, TSMC, and Samsung are all simultaneously expanding fab capacity in the United States, they are all competing for the same small pool of experienced process engineers, which drives up compensation costs and creates the very real risk of a fab sitting built and equipped but unable to run at full capacity simply because there aren't enough qualified people to staff it. Now say construction is complete, the equipment is installed, and staffing is in place. You'd think the hard part is over. It isn't, because now comes the part of this business that has no equivalent in almost any other industry, the yield problem. A semiconductor fab doesn't simply turn on and start producing perfect chips. Every new process node, every jump to a smaller and more advanced transistor size, starts with a yield rate, the percentage of chips on a wafer that actually work correctly, that can be shockingly low. Ramping a new process from an initial yield of well under 50% up to a commercially viable rate above 90% can take many months of continuous engineering refinement, and every wafer produced during that ramp-up period, whether it yields usable chips or not, costs roughly the same amount to process. A fab running at low yield is burning through the same expensive materials and machine time as a fab running at high yield, just producing far less that can actually be sold. This is why a technically completed fab can still lose money for a year or more after its grand opening ceremony. Here's where it gets interesting because the revenue side of this business has a structure unlike almost anything else in manufacturing. The first and most straightforward layer is per wafer pricing, where foundries charge customers based on the number of finished wafers processed at a given technology node, with prices climbing sharply as the process gets more advanced. A wafer processed at a mature, older node might sell for a few $1,000s, while a wafer at the most cutting-edge node available can sell for well over $20,000, reflecting the exponentially higher cost and complexity of producing it. This is why the industry obsesses over chasing the leading edge. The pricing power at the frontier is dramatically higher than anywhere else on the technology curve, even though the cost to get there is also dramatically higher. The second layer is capacity reservation and long-term supply agreements. Because building and ramping a fab takes years, major customers, the Apples and Nvidias of the world, don't simply place an order and wait. They pay to reserve capacity years in advance, sometimes helping fund the construction of new fab lines specifically dedicated to their production, in exchange for guaranteed access to output once the fab comes online. This transforms the foundry's revenue from a purely transactional wafer-by-wafer sale into something closer to a long-term contracted relationship, which provides crucial revenue visibility to justify the enormous upfront capital spending in the first place. The third layer, and the one most specific to the legacy chip strategy, is the mature node business. While the entire industry's attention gravitates toward the smallest, most advanced transistors, the vast majority of chips actually shipped globally, the ones controlling your car's power windows, your washing machine, your thermostat, are made on process nodes that are, by industry standards, ancient, sometimes a decade or more old. These nodes are fully depreciated, meaning the original capital cost has already been paid off, run at extremely high and stable yields because the process has been refined for years, and serve customers who prize reliability and long-term supply continuity over cutting-edge performance far more than they prize the latest transistor size. A fab that made its money back on the leading edge years ago and now runs quietly on mature nodes can be one of the most consistently profitable assets in a company's entire portfolio, precisely because nobody is racing to compete with it anymore. To understand how the risk in this industry plays out in the real world, it helps to look at what happened during the COVID-era chip shortage. Automakers, assuming demand would collapse during the pandemic, canceled their chip orders early, freeing up mature node fab capacity that Foundries quickly reallocated to consumer electronics customers whose demand was surging instead. When car sales rebounded far faster than anyone predicted, automakers went back to place new orders and found themselves at the back of a line that had already been filled by other customers, triggering a shortage that shut down auto production lines worldwide for the better part of 2 years and cost the auto industry tens of billions of dollars in lost production. The lesson here isn't just about pandemic disruption. It's that fab capacity, once reallocated, doesn't snap back instantly. There's no spare capacity sitting idle in this industry waiting to absorb a sudden demand shift, because idle capacity is exactly what every operator works constantly to eliminate given how expensive the equipment sitting behind it actually is. An even more instructive case study is what happened to Intel over the past decade. For years, Intel was the unquestioned leader in process technology, manufacturing its own chips at the most advanced nodes in the world. Then a series of delays, most notably a multi-year struggle to move its manufacturing process forward, allowed competitors like TSMC to pull decisively ahead in transistor technology. Intel's own chips began falling behind rivals in performance, and the company that once defined the cutting edge found itself, for a period, actually having some of its most advanced chips manufactured by the very foundry competitor that had overtaken it. The structural lesson is stark. In an industry where the entire value proposition rests on being at or near the technological frontier, falling behind by even one process generation doesn't just cost you market share incrementally. It can flip you from being an industry-defining leader to a customer of your own former challenger, and clawing back that lead can take the better part of a decade and tens of billions of dollars in reinvestment. Now let's build a realistic scenario. Say a company decides to build a single leading-edge fab today. Construction and equipment costs, accounting for the near certainty of delays and overruns based on recent industry history, land somewhere around $20 billion, spread across a construction and ramp-up period of 4 to 5 years. Once operational and running at a mature yield, that fab might process enough wafers annually to generate somewhere between $4 and $6 billion in yearly revenue at full capacity against operating costs, including the specialized materials, energy, water treatment, and highly skilled labor of $2 to $3 billion a year. On paper, once you reach steady-state operation at good yield, the economics can look genuinely excellent, generating billions in annual operating profit against that initial investment. The problem is entirely in the word once. Getting from groundbreaking to that steady-state, fully yielded operation reliably takes the better part of a decade when you account for construction delays, yield ramp challenges, and the recruitment of a specialized workforce, and during nearly all of that time, the fab is a pure cost center, consuming billions in capital while generating little to no offsetting revenue. The two honest scenarios. In the good version, construction proceeds close to schedule, the specialized equipment arrives on the timeline promised despite the industry-wide backlog, yield ramps steadily and reaches commercially viable levels within the first year of operation rather than dragging out for 2 or 3, and the fab secures long-term supply agreements with major customers that provide revenue visibility well before the facility even opens. Under those conditions, the fab becomes exactly the technological chokepoint asset the fantasy promised, generating enormous margins at the leading edge while customers compete for access to your limited capacity rather than the other way around. In the realistic bad version, construction runs years behind schedule due to specialized labor shortages and supply chain bottlenecks for the construction materials themselves. The extreme ultraviolet lithography equipment arrives later than promised because you're competing with better established customers for the same limited production slots, and once operational, yield ramps far more slowly than projected because the process technology proves more difficult to stabilize than engineering models predicted. Meanwhile, a competitor reaches the next process node first, and the customers who were going to anchor your fab's revenue with long-term agreements instead direct their most advanced chip designs to whichever foundry got there first, leaving your brand new, enormously expensive fab running below capacity on a node that's already becoming yesterday's technology by the time you've fully ramped it. The gap between these two scenarios isn't measured in millions. It's measured in tens of billions of dollars over the life of a single fab, and it can be the difference between owning the most important manufacturing asset in the global economy and owning one of the most expensive stranded assets in industrial history. So why, given all of this risk, do governments and the wealthiest technology companies in the world keep pouring money into building new fabs? Because whoever controls leading-edge semiconductor manufacturing controls a choke point that touches literally every other advanced industry on the planet, from artificial intelligence to military hardware to consumer electronics, and that strategic importance has made this one of the only industries where governments now directly subsidize private construction costs. Recognizing that leaving this capability concentrated in a handful of facilities, most of them geographically close to potential geopolitical flashpoints, represents a national security exposure that no company alone would rationally choose to insure against. The United States, the European Union, Japan, and others have all committed tens of billions of dollars in direct subsidies specifically to convince chipmakers to build fabs on their soil, effectively subsidizing away some of the brutal capital risk we've just walked through, because the alternative, a world where advanced chip manufacturing sits entirely in one geographic region, is judged to be a bigger risk than the subsidy itself. Which brings us back to the picture we started with. The building the size of dozens of football fields, the humming machinery, the sense of owning the single most important choke point in the modern economy. That part of the fantasy is, in a narrow sense, true. A fab that reaches the leading edge and maintains it becomes one of the most powerful competitive positions in all of global industry, generating margins most manufacturers can only dream of. But getting there means surviving a construction and ramp-up timeline that can stretch the better part of a decade, competing for equipment and talent against every other well-funded player in the world doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, and accepting that the moment you stop advancing, a competitor's next process node can turn your multi-billion-dollar facility from the most important building in your industry into an expensive relic almost overnight. The people who make real money in this business aren't the ones who built the biggest fab. They're the ones who understood, going in, that they weren't really building a factory. They were entering a permanent technological race where standing still is the only guaranteed way to lose.